Welcome to our information session on Town Meeting Article 15, Opt-in Specialized Energy Code. The League of Women Voters of Needham and Green Needham Collaborative are both co-hosting, and both groups have endorsed the article. Just a quick word about the League of Women Voters endorsing the article. I did have a question on this. We always make it clear that we do not endorse candidates or parties, but the League does advocate for issues that it has a position on and that is approved by our board of directors. And this article meets those criteria. Tonight we have two guest speakers, Stephen Frail and Nick Falkoff. Stephen will give a presentation and Nick is here to answer questions. So let's go ahead and hear from Stephen. He's a Needham Town Meeting member and he's chair of our Climate Action Plan Committee.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate the introduction. For my fellow town meeting members, this may be the first time you're hearing from me as chair of the Climate Action Planning Committee. But this article is one of the first actions that the committee has recommended that the town take. For those of you who don't know, the committee sits underneath the select board. We are chartered by the select board, and we are tasked with providing recommendations to the town for how it can meet the state's net zero greenhouse gas emissions targets by 2050. So I'll be going through a little bit that today. In terms of today's talk, I'm planning to talk about the why, why are we recommending this opt-in specialized energy code for the town? What is it? And then we'll have a chance to go through some FAQs and then answer your questions as well. And as Karen mentioned, Nick Falkoff from Auburndale.
Oh, get a sweatshirt. I don't need a sweatshirt.
We need somebody to mute their line there. Okay. So, climate change can be a difficult topic. Sometimes a little humor is helpful. Somebody sent this to me just recently, and I thought it might be a good way to kind of kick our why are we doing this? So I don't know where you may personally fall on this, but typically most people are kind of in the, oops, we probably should have done something a few decades ago. In fact, scientists have really known that climate change is a big issue, and that it's human caused for several decades. In fact, a recent survey of climate-related papers published between 2012 and 2020 indicated that there's a 99% scientific consensus that climate change is human caused. So that's where we're at. And it's here. So a lot of people, unfortunately, have been seeing this firsthand in Needham. So the August 8th rainstorms 2023 is an example of one aspect of climate change, and that is excessive precipitation events. So we had vehicles, homes, businesses, as well as our Rosemary Pool, all dramatically impacted by that very brief but very intense rainstorm on August 8th. There's actually a lot of science behind being able to say that. So with each additional 1 degree Fahrenheit of temperature, the atmosphere can hold 4% more vapor, water vapor. And so more water vapor up there means when it does rain, we have much more intense rainfalls than historically we've had. In Needham, since the pre-industrial era, the temperature has warmed already by 3.4 degrees. So that effectively means, using that math equation, that we're about 16% water vapor can be held in the atmosphere above Needham. And local extreme rainfall events are becoming much more common across the planet and even locally. The estimates now are that our models of a 1 in 100 year storm or a 1 in 1,000 year storm are off by as much as 50%. In those 1 in 1,000 year storms, which parts of Needham did see in that August 8th event, are going to become much more common than 1 in 1,000 years. And we're seeing other examples of this. So almost exactly a year before the rain event, there was a significant drought. Droughts are also caused by climate change, or increasingly caused by climate change for the same reason. So when that water comes out of the ground, it doesn't always fall where it came out, and that can result in significant droughts. And we're also seeing more wind events like wind shears and even tornadoes in the area. So we can expect more of this as climate change continues to impact more storms, more heat waves, more drought, more flooding. And that's why we're taking action. So first and foremost, we're trying to ensure that Needham reduces its contribution to climate change. But doing so can also save us money and resources, both in reducing the impact of climate change on our infrastructure, our homes, our businesses, but also increasingly some of the actions that we can take can save us money in terms of lower cooling bills and less expensive construction. There's also a Massachusetts state law that was passed that I alluded to at the introduction, which commits the state to hitting net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. It requires us to take immediate action and really come up with a pathway to getting there. We can't do it overnight. It's going to take a lot of effort. This specialized opt-in energy code is one of the first steps we can take. So buildings in Needham account for about 2/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions. So if you look at the green on the right, the dark green is residential buildings, and that's about 37% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and 27% are in our commercial buildings. So achieving our net zero targets is going to require both efficiency upgrades to these existing homes and buildings, as well as anything that's built between now and 2050. One other way of looking at our emissions is to look at the share of emissions that come just from municipal vehicles and buildings. And if you see the bottom left here, about 2.5% total of our greenhouse gas emissions come directly from town. So it really is the residential buildings, the commercial buildings, as well as passenger vehicles that are driving our contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. That said, we do have some large municipal projects on the horizon with Mitchell School and Pollard School, as well as a DPW building that will be renovated or rebuilt. There's also coming down the pipe a MBTA Communities Act, which could spur significant new development in town. If passed, this would potentially result in mixed housing, mixed use housing with residential and commercial commingled. So just some background on the Stretch Energy Code history, as well as where we got today. So Green Communities Act was passed in 2009, and that's when the Stretch Energy Code, which we currently have in Needham adopted, was first released. And it was setting requirements at 20 to 35% above the base energy code. Every 3 years, the base energy code is increased to match the stretch code, and then the stretch code is extended further. It wasn't until 2019, about 10 years later, that Needham adopted the stretch energy code at annual town meeting. In 2021, the state, as I mentioned, mandated a new energy code to provide a path for the state to reach net zero. That was this new specialized energy code. In that same year at town meeting voted to approve a resolution declaring a climate and ecological emergency. So 2022, the code was actually released. This is after many months of public comment at the state level, and it was introduced for new construction. In 2023, the stretch code, which I mentioned, is increased every 3 years, was updated again, and it went into effect in Needham in January of this year. And this fall, we're recommending that the town also adopt the opt-in specialized energy code. Thus far, 24 communities, representing almost a quarter of the population of Massachusetts, have adopted the specialized code. You can see the list at the bottom. Quite a few of our neighbors, Wellesley, Watertown, Newton, Sherborne, Lexington, Carlisle, Concord, are all already adopting it. Of these, 4 have actually started to apply it to new building permits as they've passed in July. The rest are mostly going to be starting to issue permits under the new code in January. And then a handful that are more recently passed it, and Needham would be in this cohort. If we pass it, we'll implement it beginning in July of next year. So it has been stated that there will be some new grants opportunities for municipalities that adopt the specialized code as one of several criteria that the state is putting out there for what they're calling the Climate Leaders Certification, which is an evolution of the Green Communities Act. So that's a big change carrot that the state's putting out there. I'll get to one of the other carrots in a minute. So the code itself, you can think of the codes as stacked on each other. There's the base code, which if no other codes are opted into by the municipality, that's what would apply to both new and new construction and renovations for commercial and residential. Needham adopted, however, the updated stretch code in 2019. So that is the current code in place, and it's what governs both new and renovations in Needham today for commercial and residential. The opt-in specialized code is a new set of appendices to the stretch energy code that apply specifically to new construction and new construction only. So if we adopt this, the only projects that will be impacted will be any new projects, new construction projects that are started after July of 2024. So here are the highlights. I mentioned this code only deals with new construction. So if you remember just one thing about this code, it's that it has no requirements for additions, alterations, and renovations. All additions, alterations, and renovations are covered by the stretch code, which is already in place. Second, for homes and buildings that are all electric construction, so if they're designed from the outset to be all electric, there are no differences between the current stretch code that's in place and the specialized energy code. Any new residential or commercial construction that uses fossil fuels, and this is important, you're allowed to use fossil fuels in new buildings under the new specialized energy code. The difference is that you'll have to pre-wire it for electric conversion and install a minimum amount of solar to offset the emissions from the home. Homes that are over 4,000 square feet, and that's the bulk of new homes built in Needham today, must offset all of the home energy's use with solar. So why are these in here? So the code is actually written to provide a lot of flexibility to builders and consumers, but also to provide consumer protection. And by that, if we go back to the original goal of the state to get to net zero, that does mean that at some point, every home, every building will have to have converted from fossil fuel heat and fossil fuel cooking and other appliances over to all electric. The best time to do that is when the building is built. But if it's not done at that point, pre-wiring for electric conversion saves the future tenant or homeowner thousands of dollars over what they would have to pay if they were to update at that point. So that's why the pre-wiring rule is in there. And then for the solar requirement, that's also to ensure that these homes are not contributing significantly to greenhouse gas increases over the next 2 decades. One other change is that multifamily over 12,000 square feet would need to meet passive house certifications. This is already widely done in affordable housing. In fact, passive house, we can talk about that if there's any questions, but essentially it's saying that the home is net zero energy. It uses no more energy on site than it produces. It's a very efficient house design, and it's one that larger buildings in particular can benefit from significantly. In fact, Boston just had one of the largest passive house building projects in the world certified recently. These significantly lower life cycle costs, and they're eligible for significant mass save incentives. So this is a little bit of an eye chart, but I just wanted to go through a few of the different types of homes and types of buildings that would be built and show the differences between the stretch code and the opt-in code. So we'll just focus on this new dwellings of up to 4,000 square feet on the top. If you read across all electric construction, there are no differences between what the stretch code is and the opt-in code under the efficiency requirements. So the houses are built to the same specifications. There's no changes in the electrification requirements under an all-electric dwelling. They both have one parking space for EV wiring, and renewable on-site generation is optional for both of them. If you go down to the mixed fuel line, so this means you've got possibly gas boiler in the house, or maybe you've got gas stove or a gas fireplace in the house. You'll notice from the efficiency perspective, they're still the same. But under electrification, under the stretch code, they don't have to do anything. Under the new opt-in specialized code, should we adopt it, they would have to pre-wire it for future conversion to all electric. Again, the EV spaces are the same. And then under renewable generation, the other change is they would be required to put solar PV panels on, assuming that there's sufficient sunlight for those homes. Under a dwelling over 4,000 square feet, it's mostly the same. There's a couple of different changes. Really, on the all electric pathway, there's no differences again, but if there's mixed fuels, in this case, they essentially have to do a 42 HERS rating under the stretch code. They have to get it down to 0. Now, HERS rating is essentially getting at the energy intensity of the building. And so HERS 0 has a much lower energy intensity rating than the HERS 42. And that's primarily done through installing solar panels on the house to offset the energy use of the house. For schools and offices, again, under all electric construction, if we design it from the outside for all electric, there's no changes in the two pathways. Under mixed fuels, again, you would have to pre-wire for conversion to all electric, and then have some on-site solar PV to offset some of the energy use of the building. Increasingly, solar is becoming part of a lot of school building projects already, so this is not a burdensome requirement. There's a lot of.
This one's more interesting.
I'm sorry, is there a question? Nope. Okay. So solar PV, as I mentioned, is becoming increasingly common on school buildings today. And then in high ventilation hospital labs, it's a very similar pattern here. All electric, there's no difference. Under mixed fuels, pre-wiring, and solar on site. Multifamily has a slight difference. So over 12,000 square feet. Under the specialized code, both all electric and mixed fuels really have one prescribed pathway, or two, I should say, a HERS 0 or a passive house certification, instead of several strategies under the current code. Electrification, again, pre-wired. And then small commercial follows the same pattern. So one of the questions we do get is, does the opt-in code require schools to be built to a high level of efficiency? Not if they're all electric. The opt-in specialized code efficiency ratings are identical for the updated stretch code if the building's all electric. Building all electric does eliminate the need for costly future retrofits. We've actually been going through this as a town, looking at retrofitting some of the buildings, and it is quite expensive. Fossil fuel is allowed in the school, but the school would have to be pre-wired for all electric, and solar PV may be required on site. One other note with schools is the MSBA state funded funding for schools is also providing a 3% adder on the refunds to municipalities that adopt the opt-in specialized energy code and go all electric. So that's a significant savings if you think of the $400 million of school buildings for coming up. If we were to get any funding from MSBA, they would provide an additional 3% back to Needham if they're all electric construction and we've adopted this code. So another question is, does the specialized energy code have any impact on renovations like the Emory Grover? renovation? No. So even if this code had been in place when the Emery Grover project started, because it's a renovation, not a new construction, it would not be covered under this opt-in specialized code. So it's still the updated stretch code and or base code that would apply for Emery Grover. We've also had this question: will the electric grid be overwhelmed by building electrification? So Eversource tells us no. At our April Climate Action Plan Committee meeting, we had Eversource representatives to present what their modeling is for Needham's electrification plans. We told them, assume that we go to net zero full electrification. So full electrification would mean all buildings, all vehicles are electric in Needham by 2050. What would Eversource need to do to support such a transition? And so they said they've got plenty of room at our substation and transmission. The one flag they said is at the local street level. Transformers, which are those cans that you see on telephone poles, may occasionally need to be upgraded. So this happens today sometimes when somebody puts in an EV charger or a solar PV on their roof. And in a full electrification mode, we could expect over time that more and more of those cans would need to be upgraded. And what that essentially does is allows to bring more electric service into the homes. So the other thing that Eversource told us is the electric grid today is operating 20% below the all-time system peak in 2006. So if you think of all the things that we've been doing over the past decade or so around switching to LED lights, more efficient appliances, having better insulation installed, doing our home energy audits, all of that has actually had a significant impact on our all-time demand. So we're 20% below what our peak was in 2006. As we electrify, we can expect that start to grow again. And so New England capacity is planned to double from 25 gigawatts to 50 gigawatts. And you might have followed some of this in the news. The state is constantly looking for new bids on offshore wind. That's all part and parcel to build the capacity to support electrification in the future. So the other point for those offshore wind is that the electric grid is mandated to get greener by 2 to 3% per year over the next decade or so, until we've effectively squeezed the fossil fuels out of our electric grid. So that's the second part of the equation. We electrify our homes, but we also need to green the electricity, which today is about 60% natural gas, and then the rest of it is a combination of cleaner sources of fuel. I mentioned that Needham had said that our substation is quite good shape. So they said by 2032, our principal substation is expected to be still only at 61% of what they call headroom. And it's basically their model for determining on the worst possible day of the year in terms of energy use, and with perhaps one of their major assets offline, how much room is there in that substation to support demand? And so you can see at 61%, we're much better off even than our neighbors in that regard. And what their planning department does is they continue to look at this number over time. And as we approach 90%, that's when they look at potential upgrades. But for the most part, we have plenty of room for electrification over the next several decades. The other thing the state has been doing is putting in incentives for builders and developers. So there are number of them. One of them, however, is DOER's modeling shows that all electric homes are generally cheaper to build. That's generally because your heat pump does both heating and cooling. And so instead of having a central AC plus a furnace and having to run gas plus the electricity in the vents, you run one vent for your heating and cooling through the heat pumps. Mass Save also provides additional incentives to builders for hitting various HERS targets. Again, that's the energy intensity of the building. So 45 single family, you get 15,000 back as a builder. 35 in passive house, you can get 25,000. Mass Save also has per unit rebates for multifamily. And then at the federal level, there's significant tax credits for building more efficiency. efficiently.